Hey, everybody, I'm Pete Bagwell. This is my first broadcast for IctusNet, and I'd be lying if I said I hadn't been dealing with a lot of different emotions over the last day or so. And I'm one of those guys that likes to get there early, start early, instead of just being punctual. So it's been a long 10 minutes just waiting for 2:30 to start. But I just want to explain a little bit about myself. I'm from Washington State. Moved to Tulsa in 2005 to go to Dave Roberson's Prayer Center Ministries, and been going ever since. I got filled when I was 18 through some home meetings where I grew up in Washington. And I went to Spokane, Washington, where John G. Lake had those healing rooms. And that was where I really had a definitive spiritual encounter. That was one of the real few times God actually knocked me down instead of me just going down because I was getting tired of standing in a prayer line. But it's been a fun while since I've lived here in Tulsa. I've met a lot of different people. I've grown up a lot. I was a huge, insecure, emotional wreck when I moved down here. But God's really helped me through a lot. He's really established himself in me. And I don't know where I would be without praying in tongues. Because that's really what made God so real to me. There's a lot of times where it felt like it was just me and him, but even if that's all I could say was just pace my apartment and pray in tongues, that was what I did. And there was a lot of trying times, and those are the times when God really wants to shine in somebody's life. Those are the times he looks forward to, because those are the times we're actually desperate enough to find him. May as well be honest. But those times when I just felt like I had nothing but God, that's when God came through the most. He took those times, he made himself so real to me. I would not be the same if I didn't try and just turn to him during all that. If I would have tried to go to some pastor or a friend that I respected for advice, it would not have been the same. And that's really what God wants. He wants to cultivate that kind of relationship with everybody. He wants each person to turn their life to him individually. And like a stained glass window in those big Catholic churches, everybody's got a different shape and a different color, and it makes one huge, beautiful picture, especially when the light gets to shine through. And that was one thing that I really struggled with when God was asking me for more in my life. It was just, I didn't want to give up all the investments I made in myself. Well, 20-some years of figuring out who I am, and then God wants all of it just so he can start over. Seemed like kind of a tall order. And God's been patient with me on that. He's really been working me through that, because that has been something hard for me to give up. There's a lot of things that I have defined in myself, through myself, without even really consulting God. And that's not really his best, let's be honest. And when I was just trying to figure out where to start with these broadcasts, God told me to go back through and look at all the conversations he and I have had in the last 3 years is what I've had documented on my phone. The rest all in notebooks and stuff before I went digital. And I was just, obviously I've heard all of it before, but the way that God presented himself in those times, there was once he was talking about me going into ministry, and he would be the one that promotes me. And he was expounding on that. He was going on about it. And then finally towards the end, he was like, I will be your Don King. You just relax, you do your thing. I'll take care of promoting you. And that he's just bluntly honest. That's how he wants to be with people. That's the relationship he wants. He wants a give and take. And sadly, there hasn't been much of a two-way street in church. And that's something I've struggled with. I have thought several times about just abandoning church, just giving church people the universal shove it gesture and just bailing, just me and God. And that's every time I tried it, God would get on my case about it, because it is about people. Even if those people suck, it's who's going to change them but God. And if they're Christians, they're the ones that are supposed to have the avenue to God. Maybe they don't know how. Maybe they just have been misinformed. Maybe they just don't want to give up part of their life. But it's still up to the people that know God, that are plugged into God, to have that kind of relationship with God that can be an influence, that can be a beacon in darkness for these people, just to be drawn to, just to be an example. Like the Azusa Street guy. I forget his name now, but people would just ask him where all of this passion comes from, this energy, where he gets it, and why, and how he does it. And this was early on. I was first really starting to get to know God. I was a lot more focused on God's footprints, the things he was doing, rather than who he is. And what this guy said was, he told this reporter or kid or whoever it was, I set myself on fire and I let the world watch me burn. Not a bad fire like a masochist or anything like that, but it's just a passion for God. You turn that light and then let God shine through it. People come to that. But it's a matter of all of us getting over ourselves. There was a lot of those conversations with me and God that involved him getting on my case about giving stuff up or just growing up. A lot of them, probably 2 years ago, I think it was, he would talk about all these circumstances that had come to me to try and bring me down. I'd stood up against them. I weathered them. I was just, by the end of the day, I was still standing, just because I kept turning to God about everything. And then 2 years ago, it's like God turned on a dime. And he's like, circumstances are done coming for a while, because what the devil's trying to do now is just turn you against yourself. Hope that American mentality of apathy and lethargy will just implode you. It'll just make you collapse in on yourself. So you'll quit progressing and you'll just kind of stay where you're at. And for a while, I may have. But I made this promise to myself when I first moved down, because there was one couple I knew here that I had talked to like 6 times, maybe, that had moved down here from where I lived for about 6 months before me and this other guy moved down. Otherwise, I had no idea what I was getting into, but I couldn't get it out of my heart that this was something that I needed to do. I didn't know why, and I had no idea what was going to happen. And I was just terrified. And the first thing God did was just come through for me again and again and again. He just brought people to me, no matter how ignorant and naive I was. But I was so zealous, and it was my passion to just have a pure heart before God. That was all I wanted. And when I had enough knowledge just to be dangerous about all this spiritual stuff, I cornered all the church friends I grew up with, because I never heard anything about speaking in tongues until I was 17 or 18. And then I found out other people knew about it and just didn't share it with me. And I had to do some forgiving for them, because that didn't seem fair that they had this gift. and didn't do anything with it, didn't share it. Like they just took it for granted. I mean, if I go buy a friend an Xbox 360, they're not just going to leave it in the closet. That's how I felt was what happened. And I ended up driving a whole lot of friends away, real good friends I'd known since elementary school. And some of those have been restored. Some of them kept trying to have interventions for me about me moving down here and joining a cult. Because at the time, there was nothing about Dave Roberson online. And so all these people were just so concerned about me. And they had a good heart, whatever. But man, it got ugly. And I really felt abandoned by a lot of them. And a couple of them, yeah, they bailed when I started getting a little weird and stupid. But a lot of those have been restored now, and we're still really good friends. One of them that I've known since second grade, he and I still play video games a lot. And he's in med school right now, so obviously video games are backseat, but it's a good bridge to stay in touch, video games, at least for me. And there was, when I first moved down here before I got married, there was this one chick that I had known for a few years, and I had kept in touch with her. And then she kept getting all these sicknesses, and I kept telling her that she didn't have to deal with them. And she would talk about how God was teaching her something through them, and then we'd quit talking for a few months, and then we'd start up again, and it'd be the same thing. We'd quit talking for a few more months, start up again. She'd have this other sickness, and then finally it got so bad. It was fibromyalgia, I think. And some respiratory issues. I don't know what all it was, because she was convinced that there was so many. But it finally got bad enough for her to listen to me, and maybe I had calmed down and incorporated a little bit of wisdom into everything I was trying to share with all these people and shove down their throats. And she was convinced, just within her mind, that God created evil. And that's where this sickness was coming from, and God was using it to teach her something. And it was the middle of the night when we were talking. I don't even know why. I'm a night owl. And it's like something just took over in my mind. And I just started going on and on and on, expounding about how God didn't create evil. It was a choice made by people. And I was talking for probably 15 minutes straight. And then I made my punchline. I made my point. I got to the end of what I was going to say. And there was this really, really, really long pause. And I was like, hello? And finally she got back to me. She's like, you know what? I can breathe. And then she went around telling all of her friends, sent out this big, huge email about how God healed her. And I was still dangerously stupid. I was still much more of a slave to my emotions then. I had that platform in her life, and I used it to try and start a relationship, because I was just that shallow. And then, of course, it ended up falling apart, because there's like 2,000 miles between us, halfway across the country. And we haven't talked since, but there's a couple other people up in Washington that are still in touch with her sister. And that sickness came back, and she didn't know how to fight it off. And now, apparently, she just lays around completely lethargic, no energy, blindingly sensitive to light. She's got to wear these really, really thick goggles all the time. And she's always negative, and she talks about how bad everything is and how sick she is, and she always focuses on all this bad stuff. And for a long time, I beat myself up over it, thinking I could have changed that if I didn't suck as much as I did. And God really, really had to deal with me on that. There was a big chunk of forgiving myself just for screwing up because I was immature. Now, if I was to do the same thing, especially now that I'm married, there would be much, much more explaining to do. But God's brought me past that. He showed me where I was falling apart, and He helped me rebuild myself. kind of like when a bone breaks, the bone rebuilds itself. So odds are it's not going to break in the same spot again. That's just how it goes. That's how God built the body. That's how he's trying to bring us up. And so I was still riding my high horse about that chick getting healed, even if I did push things to a breaking point. And there was this other friend from Washington that she kept having these nightmares. It was at least 5 nights a week. And she hated falling asleep. It's like she'd fall asleep, and then this black ball would keep slowly coming towards her and keep growing and growing and growing. And then when it got up close enough, it's like it exploded, and all of her fears just manifested in that black ball. That's all she could see. There was all this negative, and it was terrifying. And I had been burned enough by myself and by church people to keep my mouth shut. So I got all strong for God and told her that didn't have to happen again. And I was talking a big game. And then we got off the phone, and this friend was going to go to sleep. So I got off the phone, and I just started begging God. I was like, I don't know what I got myself into, but if you could just go ahead and do me a solid this time, I'd really appreciate it. And I didn't want to bother this friend for a while. I heard back a few days later, they hadn't been having any nightmares ever since. And I don't talk to him much anymore, so I don't know what happened. But God came through for me that one time. And really, that's what it's about. I was trying to put a lot of myself out there for these people, thinking I'd get something out of it, thinking that was some of my reward. And then I was finally having some quiet time with God, and he shook some sense into me. He's like, what? All these treasures you think you're building up, what are you going to buy when you get to heaven? What do you think matters? What are you doing? What is my priority? And looking back on all these conversations God and I had, God's a big fan of rhetorical questions just to paint me into a corner so I only have one answer. And it's obviously his answer because he knows what he's doing. But I could have been drooling on myself for as stunned as I was when God asked me that. And that just that shifted gears for my whole life and the way I approach most people. And there's still a lot of people I don't like. That's something God's working with me on. But just well-meaning, good-hearted people, man, it's not about me doing something for them. It's about me being God for them. It's about me being God's conduit into their life. And another one of these conversations he and I had a year or so ago, he said, when these people accept you, they accept me by default just because I'm in you. So you just be yourself, you keep doing your thing, you be honest up front with them, you keep praying for them, you keep them on your heart, you keep a pure heart in front of me. I will manipulate that tiny, tiny little place of peace that they have in their heart. And I will try and get them addicted to it. I will keep bringing that up to them and bringing it up to them. All you got to do is be around to make it contagious. And looking back on it now, it's really that peace that God instilled in me. That was how I kept finding God's guidance, even if it took me months. Like that was how I knew about moving down here from Washington, giving up all my family. That still has not been all that easy. But that peace, that doesn't go anywhere. It keeps coming up. God tells you one thing, you start freaking out, you just run away from it. And then you start coming back to God real timidly. That peace comes back with that answer that is just so terrifying. And it's the peace that you can't get away from because God is just so consistent. He doesn't really get nervous. He's got no reason to. And that's, even if I have waited too long, it's that peace. That's how I know it's God. Even if it's an answer God's given me that doesn't make sense, and the devil's telling me something that just, I've been hearing for years, and I'm just not quite sure about it. I pray, I find that peace, I find the answer. Even if I got to keep finding that peace 1,000 times, it doesn't change. That's the easiest way to find God, is with that peace. Even if it's just a tiny little sliver in your heart, you got to struggle to find it. It's there. I spent months and months and months and months praying about moving down here. I ended up springing it on my mom on Christmas Day. That probably wasn't the best idea. But that seemed like a good opportunity to me. And she took it well. Nobody really tried to talk me out of it. I don't know why nobody did, except my friends that tried to get all religious with me. And then we ended up butting heads for a while. And that peace has really brought me a lot of maturity. I've been here almost 8 years. It'll be 8 years next February. And first few years, I went up to Washington, saw family 3 times a year, spring, summer, winter. And then God told me to start trimming it back to 2. So I'd go in the summer and I'd go in the winter. And then God had me trim back to 1, and that was a little harder because there's family reunions in the summer and the winter, and I didn't want to give up either one. And I still remember getting on the plane with my wife, Carrie, out of Washington, coming back here in the summer of last year, not this last summer, the year before. We were on the tarmac. I was just kind of playing through all the memories I just made, just playing through them in my mind. And Carrie, my wife, had the window seat. I was sitting in the middle, and some dude had the aisle seat. And I was just looking outside at all the mountains and all the evergreen trees. And God told me not to plan a return trip. And that was really hard. Not knowing when I'll see any of them again. Still hard, obviously. But when you know it's God, what do you do? No, so I powered through this summer, just working at my job. There's a couple of times where I'd have a little heart-to-heart with God about how much I think it sucked having to stay here. But I knew it was Him. And a couple weeks ago, I was driving to work early. I work a lot of mornings. And Carrie had been asking if we were going to go up there and see all my friends and family next summer, if we could start making plans for that. I hadn't heard God say anything about it. So I just said I didn't know. We still had like 9 months to plan. So no big rush yet. We got plenty of other stuff to tackle. And I was just driving to work. I lifted up to God, just expecting another, just wait and see. Because I like to ask a lot of questions, so I get that answer a lot. And then He just laid it out for me in a split second. He said, long story short, I got no problem with you going up to Washington next summer if your maturity level hits a certain threshold. There's a lot of stuff you're going to be walking into when you go up there that right now you're just not ready for. And I'm not going to let you go up there and walk blind into some trap if all you're going to do is fall for it. And the ACTIS team, they'd already been talking to me for a while about doing a live broadcast. And to be honest, God had been bothering me about doing a Bible study here at home for 1.5 years, 2 years. And I kept putting it off because I just don't like being social, to be honest. I'm not a host. I'm not really all that friendly most of the time. I just kind of like to keep to myself. So I kept putting it off, and I would keep asking God what he wanted me to do. And he kept saying, start a Bible study. And I would just keep saying, well, no, I don't like the idea. And, we just kind of be amicable friends for a while, and then I'd start getting hungry for God again, and the same answer would come. And then finally, he just had mercy on me, because I don't know why I was being so stubborn about it, to be honest. But he adjusted his plan for me, because I was being a coward. I may as well tell it like it is, right? And so he stayed quiet about having any kind of outreach to anybody. He would just let me pray, give me some advice, some wisdom, counsel every now and again. And then Pam and Bernard came up to me with this opportunity. And I knew in my heart, as soon as they brought it up to me, that it was something God was wanting me to do. But I was still a little timid about talking, because most of the time I like to be on the listening end. I went and did some natural disaster work with some friends in Houston a while back. Like I think 2008, when Hurricane Ike hit Houston, Texas, and they were all listening to this mystical documentary about this secret, and it's basically the power of confession. It just excludes God, and I just let them listen to it, and they all tried, and crap just fell apart. Man, we couldn't get business for anything, and I didn't even realize it. But at the end of the night, one of my buddies came up to me when I was just outside, just kind of hanging out, and he was out having a cigarette. He's like, "Dude, are you okay?" I was like, "Well, yeah. Why? Well, you haven't said a single word all day long. I didn't know if you were going to kill us in the truck or what." Most of the time I'm not a talker. It takes an act of God, obviously. So, all that said, God telling me my maturity level had to be at a threshold. I knew that had a lot to do with this broadcast, and that basically God was banking on this to bring me up to the level where he's wanting me to be, where I should have been with those Bible studies 2 years ago. Just to be blunt, I had been crippling my own progress just because I didn't trust God. And I heard Gary's success story, and that was easy to swallow just because it's somebody else. And it's all already happened. It's long since gone. And God used Gary Carpenter's Bible studies in the early days. He used that as an analogy to the kind of Bible study that I would have, where I heard Gary say it was harder to stop than it was to start. And God told me that's exactly how he wanted it to be with mine. But I didn't trust him enough when he told me that I had it in me to do that. So here we are with a different avenue. And I really don't like talking to church people. I hate the buzzwords. I hate how knowledge is treated almost like a currency, how revelation knowledge, what God said to you, is almost like a means of getting respect within church. Who cares? I burned a lot of bridges just because I was not very nice to those people. And where I work, man, I work at this grocery store where it is just a bunch of godless heathens. Man, one of my best friends spends hundreds of dollars a month on weed. And God only knows how much he drinks. He goes to the bar quite a bit with other friends. And I've gone with him. Why? It's a bridge to reach these people. If you got nothing in common with them, why would they want to be like you? If you're too good to meet them where they're at? Man, I went over to his house and played video games. One day we played something on PS3, and between each level he had to go out and take a cigarette break because he was just getting too stressed out. And every once in a while he would bust out the weed pipe, and he and his wife would just smoke a bowl, whatever. I was just sitting there on the bed with them, and then they're coughing up a long biscuit after they take a hit. They're trying to pass me the pipe, and they don't even realize what they're doing because they can't even see. They're just, their faces over here just hacking, and then they're shaking the pipe over at me, and then they finally come to themselves and realize who they're looking at. And they're like, oh yeah, right. Then they just pass it to the next person. So what, man? I have fun with them. Those people I work with, some of them are gay. Some of them got these huge gauges in their ears. They got tattoos all up and down. I don't even know how many hundreds of dollars that would cost. They got piercings just all over everywhere. But they're comfortable with themselves. And that's something that a lot of church people just don't have. That's not an attribute you find in church. Everybody's just seemed to have lost focus on God and just starts, they're wanting to make church like a face-to-face version of Facebook, where it's all about socializing and networking. It's who you know, and having somebody to agree with you in prayer when you need something. When I was a manager at a movie theater, this chick, she had done she led worship in this church, just here and there, just a song every now and again. But she had the gift. She had it. And then she just got burned by church people. She wanted nothing to do with church. But she had a pure heart. You could just tell that there was scorch marks all over it from getting burned. And she had, that was one of the first jobs I had when I moved down here, so I was still pretty dumb. And she had seen me through some of my worst problems that I'd come up against. And I would, we were just cool. She'd know I was having an issue. I could just be straight up with her about what was going on, and she wouldn't think I was less of a Christian. And I would, she had no problem when I asked her to pray for me. And man, that kind of pure heart goes a lot further with God than somebody that just goes and plays church. And she had prayed for me on multiple occasions. Not that it's something she was comfortable with, but she was doing it as a favor to me. And it was a way for God to show her that she's not that far away from him. She's not out of his reach. She hasn't disappointed him. And that's what the message the people that know God need to convey. And my wife and I have a pretty unconventional marriage. She didn't change her last name when we got married, and I didn't care. And apparently both of those weren't supposed to play out like that. We still tell people at church, like we turned into a game. We didn't even tell people that we got married. So I think a year and a half, 2 years after we got married, somebody was asking Carrie if we were ever going to get married, or if, how long we've been dating. And Carrie got the biggest laugh out of it. But then they find out that her name isn't the same as mine, and you can see the disdain dripping out of their voice. Like, well, that's just not Christian. Says who? Well, the man's the head of the household. Yeah, but I think that term has evolved into something a little more manipulative and emotional than the way God meant it. If a marriage is a friendship, there's some leeway. Every friendship has different dynamics. My friendship with God is different than anybody else's. If he says he can be my Don King, Have you ever heard that in church? Really? I mean, come on. And he's told me that, like with that Bible study and with being more vocal about God with people at work, he just told me to grow a pair and just start talking. He can just be as real with me as I can be with my buddy that smokes a lot of pot. And there's nothing wrong with that. God doesn't like pulling punches with me. And I like to take that same kind of perspective to all my other relationships. Sometimes it's not very well received because I'm not that good with dealing with emotions, or well, catering to them, rather. It was probably 3 or 4 years ago. I had just departed from a job, and I had a lot of time on my hands. So the time I didn't spend trying to work towards making money. However, I just spent that time praying more. And God told me that he was going to start developing me in these different offices of Christianity, in these different offices, biblical offices of the New Testament. And I was just praying, and one day it's like in my mind's eye, everything just went colorblind. All I could see was black and white. I didn't see any gray area. And it has been like that ever since. And I've taken that with, I've gone miles with that. Not always the best miles, because there's some people that emotions run deep with them. And I'm not really the best at interacting with those kind of people. And that's actually caused a little bit of a rift among some family for the time being. But the things God's been able to show me through that, man, that has, it's been dandy. Just continuing to get to know him. And honestly, I got more in common with people outside of church than I do with people in, except for the fact that I'm an avenue for God. I have a better time going to a bar with friends after work than I do doing a lot of churchy stuff. Didn't know how to say that any other way. I remember listening to one guy start talking about how you give up your Christian witness and God can't reach you through those, can't work through you to reach those people. If you go out to a bar with them, you just sell out your testimony. God can't use you for them anymore. So I forget the gist of it, but basically I would forfeit my witness as a Christian if I had a sip of alcohol with those friends. That's half of what they know. That and smoking whatever. And man, I was not happy at all when I heard that. Because I looked around the church and there was all these bobbleheads, I said, yeah. And I busted out the phone. I sent a message to half a dozen of the people I work with on a regular basis, people that know I'm a Christian, that I've gone out and just had fun with, just had fun, joked around, had drinks. I sent them all a message, the same message, saying, hey, have I ever, any single time that we have gone out to drink, has that ever impacted your perspective of Christianity in a negative manner? And all of them were really emphatic about saying no. And then I found out this one guy I'm really good friends with, he got furious about it. He's like, man, nobody is going to bring my PD down. Nobody's going to try and oppress him. He was ready to find that guy and just beat him. I got good friends. But I look at a lot of Christians and I just see the way they're going, and it's obvious in some of them what the priorities are within their hearts and how they see things. You know, you see the same people in the prayer line week after week after week after month after year. There's people that have been coming to the prayer center longer than me that are still the same. I used to have them up on a pedestal. I would just, they knew all the buzzwords. They would talk all spiritual. And I was like, man, that's what I want to attain to. That's my next step. And then God gave me his next step. And it was nothing like that. It was to the point where I was like, I used to look up to him, like that's where I want to go. And now I just kind of look down and I see him, not in a negative way, but it's like, hey, you ever going to catch up? And I think a lot of that comes from some kind of weird unspoken misconception that there's something in Christianity for me. When, well, yeah, there is heaven, a relationship with God. You get to know Jesus. The Holy Spirit walks you step by step through your life. Easy. Except it's supposed to cost us something. When, throughout the Gospels, did you see Jesus taking from people? He spent his whole life investing into others, and well, look what the returns got him. But if he's the firstborn and he is our example, we're ways off the mark. And for some reason, there's this weird stigma about Christians and money. And God's not a vending machine, and he's not a slot machine. He is a dad. That's what he cares about. His heart is for all these kids. Man, I don't know. I don't have kids. I don't feel. But can you imagine any parent, any rational, level-minded, loving, kind parent just abandoning their kid? I mean, when I was a sophomore in high school, I was such a monster. And I had butted heads with my parents a lot, but they never kicked me out. You could tell they loved me regardless of those awful unfair rules they tried to impose on me. God's in it for everybody else. That's the bottom line. If you really, really have a heart for God, a heart to please God, if you want to assimilate God's heart and be that kind of conduit for other people, it's going to cost you something. Man, there was this guy at work. Man, stupid church people make the best segue to start conversations about God. There have been times where I would just be all kinds of worked up about some church thing, man, and I would just be all up in arms, just frustrated and angry, just impassioned about it. And then one of my friends at work would get there and start working, like, hey man, what's going on? And they love me enough to listen to what I say, even if it's got absolutely no bearing on their life. They just want to help me out. They will lend their ear for me. They'll be that listening ear. And so I will just go off about church people and how much I think a lot of them suck, and just how I love these guys so much more, because you can tell the ones that have a heart for God and the ones that don't. I don't want to get down on all church people, because there's a lot of good ones, but they're usually a lot quieter and not so outspoken and social. But man, I just start going off about my aggravations and my frustrations about just church in general. And then they'll start talking about it. And you can see them, that poison in them, come out just a drop at a time, regardless of how many gallons of poison in their spirit they've been harboring against God, against church, against Jesus, against religion. But you can see some of it accidentally start leaking out whenever you just make that kind of segue. I remember Carrie and I went out to eat with, it was supposed to be with one of my real close friends and his wife, but his wife bailed at the last minute, and he sent me a text saying she feels like a bag of farts. He said when we got to the restaurant, he was like, "Yeah, I sat there and I typed it out, and I just started giggling to myself when I said it." And so the three of us, me, my wife Carrie, and this guy, we were at this delightful little place called Wingstop, artery clogging good food, and we're just having fun. We didn't have an agenda to always have to bring up God. Just wanted to have fun. Our heart's going to get across to those people. God, if He's got an avenue, you don't need to use words so much. And I'll never forget this friend, and he was talking to Carrie, telling her about a conversation he and another coworker were having about me. And they were trying to figure out how I have it all together, how it just seems like things are in order in my house. And Carrie was just kind of listening, just being a good sport. She knew it was God. But he finally got to the point where he was like, "Man, what is He doing? What's He got that we don't?" And Carrie had the good taste to just kind of let him answer it himself. We didn't need to get all preachy about it. There was another time I was over at that guy's house, and there was some other friends there, and they were smoking a bowl, whatever. And they were passing it around. I was just sitting there, just laughing at them, choking. And one of them, I think it was my buddy's wife, she was like, so how come you don't smoke? I was like, "Well, I don't like having stuff in my lungs," which is true. She's like, "Well, okay." And she'd take another hit. "So how come you don't smoke?" "I just don't like having stuff in my lungs." "Oh, all right. When my friend, when we got married, my mom was all, she was all religious and pushy about it, and she wanted to have a Jesus-themed wedding, and she just wanted to have this and this and this, and she wanted to have a pastor from this denomination at church." And she was going off about how much religion meant to her mom, and how her mom kept trying to shove it down their throats. And I was just listening. I like taking tactics from my friends when you know what irritates them. Then you know what not to do. How easy is that? And so she got done with her story, and she's like, "So how come you don't smoke?" I was like, "Man, I don't like having stuff in my lungs. That's why I don't smoke anything." "Oh, okay. All right, cool." And then I honestly don't know how many times they asked. And I just played along. I was a good sport about it. And then when we were all done hanging out, I got in my car, started going home. And God was like, "Hey, you know why she kept asking?" I said, "Well, she was stoned, so she probably forgot she asked. And he said, well, no. She was baiting you to see if you were going to say it's a sin. Man, for me, it's something God told me not to do. For them, I don't know how much they could care about what God has to say about things. The reason they don't want to be a part of church is because they want to do things their own way. They want to live life their way. So what kind of monster would I be for pushing my standards onto them? But man, somebody that's been... Hello? A bit of lag there. Somebody that's been playing church for years and years and years, why should they not be held to the same standard that I push myself for? The standard of the high call of God, reaching God's heart and touching other people through Him. How are they exempt from this same kind of standard of touching God's heart by bringing other people to Him? Man, I could not even imagine being in God's position, having so many hateful, slanderous things just thrown about like they're fact about a guy that is so polar opposite about all of that stuff. Man, God didn't put disease on anybody. He's not going to put you in a car wreck to teach you anything. He's not going to make you go blind as a punishment for sucking. I had this chat with a friend actually just last night. He was stressing about something that's coming up, and he was like, man, I don't know about all these emotions, man. I don't know if God was talking to me when He said that just chill out and be cool. I don't know if it was me talking to myself. I don't know if God's punishing me for turning my back on Him for a while, if He's doing me like Job. I was like, man, you've got to get that kind of toxic thinking out of your head first and foremost, or you're never even going to know who God is. He's like, what? He grew up with a lot of guilt. It's one of those kind of religions. Well, doctrines, denominations. But, man, it's not that hard to just live out what is not a misconception about God. If your priority can line up with God's priority, even 75, 80%, you're a whole lot further along. God's got a whole lot more to work with than most of the church. There's this church I grew up in that actually had their own intervention for me because God doesn't talk to people. They had bulletins and an itinerary of the service every Sunday. You know, God can work in that, but how much leeway is there really? Say this pastor has decided to preach, I don't know, about the Easter or whatever, the Easter coming up or the Passover or whatever. And this wife escapes her husband's possessive clutches coming to church just hoping to find some comfort, find some answers. And all she needs is to hear from God. She needs God to home in on that place in her heart where He has been trying to comfort her, but she doesn't know how to let Him. She's just consumed with circumstances. All she needs, 2 sentences from the pastor, but he's so focused on his sermon about the Passover that he just completely disregards anything God's trying to say to him. That ain't right. I was listening to this one guy, I think it was Graham Cook. He said he was doing this prayer line, And, up behind him, it just looked like a slaughterhouse. There was just bodies laying all over everywhere. And then he got to this young girl, and all he kept hearing was a red sweater. And he's like, God, that's stupid. I'm not going to say that. That doesn't even make any sense. And so he just kind of kept standing there stalling, hoping for a better answer. And God just kept telling him the same thing, red sweater. So finally he got this chick's attention. And he's like, I don't even know if this means anything to you, but all God is saying to me to say to you is red sweater. And dude, this chick flipped out. She just went ballistic. Turns out her family and her extended family used to play this game with her they would call red sweater that involved a lot of molestation. Yep. So at least he could hear God well enough to know when to obey, as stupid as it sounded. And then there's stories like when I keep getting to know God, I'll be praying and praying and praying, and nothing's going to get in the way this time. And then somebody will come on my heart. It'll just pop up in my mind. Like, oh, God wants me to call this person. So I pull out my phone, I give them a call. And they're like, hello? I was like, hey, what's going on? Thinking they're just gonna unload on me about all these awful things, and they're so glad I called, and they don't know what to do. And I'm like, oh, not much. Just watching some TV, thinking about what I want to do for dinner. What's up? It's like, nothing. Just thought I'd check in, see how things are going. How are you? There was a short, really, really awkward conversation. Only did it once. Get a little paranoid after screwing up that time. But there is a lot of learning from mistakes along this road. I was telling this dude last night about learning to listen, learning to hear from God, when it's him, when it's not. And I used to live in another little town just outside of Tulsa. And there's two ways to get into the main, to get to Tulsa. And I had taken Route A just to get home. And then I had to go back out later for, church or just to get some food or whatever. And so I was pulling out of the neighborhood, and God was like, hey, take Route A again. And I didn't know it was God. So I was like, man, I already took Route A. I'm going to take Route B. So I took Route B, and there was this awful traffic jam just this side of where Route A intersects with the road I was trying to get on. So I was sitting there in traffic for like 45 minutes, beating myself up over how stupid I felt. I was like, well, I guess that really was God, so now I will know for later. You make mistakes. But God's loved me through mine. And, I may have made a couple today. And looking back on these conversations God and I have had, there was one where he really, really emphasized being a solid, consistent representative for God all the time, to everybody, not giving a single person a reason to say, well, Pete, I couldn't know God because Pete was a jerk. God's been working with me on that one. Because there's a couple people at work I would just assume backhand or avoid than be Jesus too. That's pride, man. I seem to still have a lot of that. But God's working with me on it. He's got a lot more patience than I do. So he's working with me on it. And I remember Gary Carpenter had one of the church services one time a few years ago, and you could tell he was out of his comfort zone because God was really pushing him to just be grossly transparent, just completely out there so everybody would know he's just as human as the rest of us. So he was, I don't even remember what the mistakes he was making were, but you could tell, man, he was just really searching for the right words so nobody would just bust out the prophet rocks and stone him to death at the pulpit. And he got done, and there was this long, long pause. He was just kind of standing there looking out at the crowd. And he's like, man, now y'all are wondering why you listen to me. And I'm wondering the same. But that, man, that stuck with me. It really helped me. It made it a lot easier for me to be transparent. Not necessarily with everybody, just because I've built up a lot of walls. God's been helping me take them down. Some of the walls are a little bigger, take a little more time. But I'm breaking the times how they got there, right? So I think I have been talking enough. I think I got enough out there. So hope you chew on that. Hope it helps. Hope you don't crucify me and send me all kinds of hate mail. Mostly because you don't know how to get a hold of me. But I love you guys. I love this opportunity. And see ya.